Vince McMahon is the weirdest person to have ever lived. He's fought God and won, fought billionaire Ted and won, sits atop the dominant global brand in his industry that also happens to turn out some of the worst content in that industry. His biggest weakness is a total rejection of weakness as a concept. For someone whose career is dedicated to simplifying down what it means to be a good guy or a bad guy, he doesn't know what a good guy is. Also, he walks like this. Point is, Vince McMahon fascinates people, from the fans who hate him and pay him to those that deify him. He is everything and nothing, and God, I want to read an honest autobiography of him so much. One of the things that people tend to agree on is that Vince is a ruthless business genius who knows a good thing when he sees it and knows when to buy it. Hulk Hogan, raiding the territories, etc., etc. But the more you read up on the early days of some of WWE's biggest stars, the more you realize Vince might just be the luckiest man in wrestling history. I'm Adam, hailing from PartsFUNknown, and here are 10 wrestlers Vince McMahon initially hated. And you know what we don't hate? Surfshark. Stick around after the list is done for a word from our sponsors. Number 10, Randy Orton. Let's talk about this first because it's the most recent story to come to light. Next year, Randall Keith Orton will celebrate his 20th continuous year on the main roster full-time. That is a ludicrously long career. He's outlasted Cena. He's been a full-timer longer than Triple H was, longer than Shawn Michaels was. The man's put in the years, which makes the apparent fact that Vince wanted no part of him initially even more insane. See, before Randy was hitting RKOs, he was hitting AWOLs. He enlisted in the Marines in the late 90s before going AWOL on 2 occasions and receiving a dishonorable discharge. Vince graduated from military school, which explains just a whole bunch about him, and if you cut him, he bleeds troops. As such, according to Jim Ross on the Grilling JR podcast, Vince didn't want to sign Randy Orton based on his negative past in the military and had to be convinced by good old JR to give Randy a second chance. I guess you could say that second chance paid off. Number 9, Samoa Joe. Absolutely heartbreaking news this week that Samoa Joe has had to vacate the NXT title due to injury. Talk about people who can't catch a fucking break. In the light of the news, you can't help but wish Joe had found a place in WWE sooner when he was more entrenched in his physical prime, because according to an interview with Fightful's Sean Ross Sapp, who's a nice boy and everyone should tell him he's a nice boy on Twitter, Vince did not want to sign Joe. In Samoa Joe's own words, Vince was, quote, vehemently opposed to the idea. Some might have thought it was to do with the TNA connection, but in fact, Bruce Pritchard revealed on Something to Wrestle With that it was because it was thought in WWE that he was, and I'm quoting again, a fat Samoan. He looked out of shape, he wasn't the body type that Vince liked, and they felt it wouldn't work. Jesus, don't pull your punches, lad. Here's hoping this new development doesn't jeopardize Joe's place in the company. Took him long enough to bloody get there. Number 8, Christian. When Edge and Christian split up, the lyrics to Christian's new operatic theme, his best theme by the way, don't at me with your just close your eyes bullshit, were Christian, Christian, at last you're on your own. A lovely sentiment that Vince McMahon did not agree with. To this day, it's a long-running wrestling in-joke that Vince hates Christian, something they even referenced in their sketch show on the network. And honestly, I really shouldn't find this funny, but Vince apparently just hated Christian's face. He didn't think Christian could connect with the audience, according to, again, Bruce Pritchard, which means Vince definitely didn't watch TNA in the mid-2000s, where the Instant Classic was one of the tentpoles of the promotion's hottest period. In fact, whenever anyone would suggest anything for Christian to Vince, he would react negatively, saying stuff like, quote, oh, goddamn, do we have to shoot him? Do we have to see that face? Like, damn, Vince, that's just his face, man. Number 7, Mick Foley. And speaking of people that Vince McMahon immediately wanted to throw a tarp over and leave on the curb for the bin men, Mrs. Foley's baby boy, one of the most endearing men to ever lace up a pair of boots. Mick Foley got over with 3 separate characters under Vince's watch and made significant contributions towards dragging the company out of the wretched new generation era, which again makes it insane that it's one of the most well-known cases of someone needing to be begged, actually begged, to allow someone else to make money for them. Jim Ross wanted to bring in Foley because, I mean, yeah, his work in WCW in Japan, say hello, but Vince strongly disliked Cactus Jack. Ironic considering that Foley's best WWE match was wrestling as Cactus Jack. According to JR on Talk is Jericho, when he suggested hiring Foley, Vince replied, oh no JR, we're not doing that. I'm going to go along with you on most of these things, but not that one. Again, luckiest man in the business. Number 6, Shawn Michaels. And the hits start coming and they don't stop coming. Hey, look, at least Vince snapped up The Rock. That much was fantastic sense. Likewise, splitting them up and running HBK as the new gen's best preening dickhead. But when it came down to making Shawn a top guy, Vince had a crazy blind spot, and I must not keep making jokes about Shawn Michaels' eyes. I must stop doing that. According to Bruce Pritchard, who at this point is basically our mole in WWE, when talking on Sam Roberts' wrestling podcast, he described how Vince didn't think HBK was championship material, which is like me not thinking that Keith Lee is husband material. According to Pritchard, whenever creative would pitch Michaels as a face, Vince would respond with lines like, and I quote, "That little son of a bitch? He'll never be a babyface in this company." Then WrestleMania 11 happened, and Vince finally saw the light, finally fueling up the rocket for Michaels' eventual coronation at Mania 12. Of course, considering the state of the roster in 1995, he didn't really have anyone else other than Bret and Shawn, so the decision was pretty much made for him. Number 5, the Royal Rumble. Okay, this one's not a wrestler, but I wanted to include it because it's literally the greatest WWE stipulation of all time. It's a 100% stroke of genius, and I cannot believe that Vince initially didn't like it. In fact, worse than that, Vince hated the concept of the Royal Rumble, so much so that he would ridicule the match innovator Pat Patterson whenever it came up. Genuinely, it's the only match that I watched every single year without fail, even when I stopped watching wrestling, and it almost never existed. In fact, it was only because Dick Ebersol, a TV executive who worked with Vince on Saturday Night's Main Event, was pressing Vince for a special idea, a one-off wrestling special for TV, when Vince turned to Pat and said, "All right, tell Dick that stupid idea you've got." Vince then told Pat to book the first Rumble entirely by himself because he still didn't believe in it, and now 33 years later, it's still the best thing on WWE's calendar. And ironically, it's a match that Vince has won. Vince also didn't like the Money in the Bank match concept either when he first heard it, which leads us nicely to number 4, Chris Jericho. Heard of him? Y2J is up there in terms of having one of the most influential and important wrestling careers of all time. ECW, WCW, WWE, AEW, even New Japan. The guy's one Impact match away from working everywhere, but getting him through the front door at WWE was a struggle. According to Jim Ross in his book Under the Black Hat, it was a huge negotiation process between him and Vince to bring Jericho on board, which makes almost no sense when you consider Y2J in the Attitude Era. Great talker, great worker, handsome, a catchphrase machine. Why did Vince not want him? In JR's own words, quotes, his f***ing height. Oh, Vince, you silly sausage. Jericho even wore lifts in his shoes when he first came to work for Mr. McMahon. That's how land of the giants it was. Even when Jericho had made it to the company, the man himself revealed it was something of a struggle for a different reason, because at the time, Vince couldn't fathom the idea of pushing a Canadian as a babyface. Ah yes, those famously rude and obnoxious Canadians. But to be fair to Vince, when has a Canadian ever gotten over? When, I ask you. Number 3, The Undertaker. So I think Vince might have the worst instincts in the world, which by the way, at this point in the list, I don't want people watching this to infer that we think Vince is terrible at his job. That's why you surround yourself with good minds, people you trust, people like JR who can convince you to take a risk with a certain person. Vince has other strengths, like biting this bit of metal or walking, key strengths. But no, Vince was shown Mark Calloway, the man who'd go on to become Mark Lord the Dark Lord, and his immediate honest-to-God reaction was, that's just another tall basketball player with red hair. I don't see anything special in him. Vince legit watched a match that Mean Mark Callis had with Lex Luger in WCW at the Great American Bash in 1990, a match that Taker worked with a dislocated hip specifically because he knew he was going to meet Vince the next day, and Vince tried to cancel that meeting with the man who went on to become the greatest gimmick in the history of the business. Number 2, Steve Austin. Is there anyone that made Vince millions of dollars that he actually wanted to sign in the first place? Well, yes, Hulk Hogan and okay, fair enough, Vince. But literally everyone else other than The Rock seems to have succeeded explicitly despite Vince McMahon. And even then, The Rock wasn't getting over with his initial gimmick. Steve Austin made so much money for Vince during the Attitude Era that even Scrooge McDuck would drown in it. On Talk is Jericho, Vince Russo claimed that when Austin came into the company as the ringmaster, McMahon was dead set against him talking. Steve Austin, one of the greatest talkers of all time. Vince McMahon told Russo that the $1 Million Man had to do all of Austin's talking for him. It's a perception that's been verified by Jake the Snake Roberts, the subject of the infamous Austin 316 promo. When Roberts told Vince that Austin was the next big thing, Vince replied, quote, "You kidding me, Jake? That guy, he'll never make it past 5th, 6th match. He's not a main eventer." And in case you didn't know, that's Vince talking about one of the most lucrative main eventers in wrestling history. But you know, hindsight's 2020. Isn't that right? Number 1, John Cena. Yes, indeed. The man for whom Vince had so much faith in as the top guy in all of wrestling that he refused to turn him heel and drove away a significant portion of his fan base. Vince's initial reaction to John Cena is hilarious because oh, the road not traveled. According to, who else, Bruce Pritchard, Cena had just been signed by the company and was walking around backstage looking like, well, like the prototype did, which is all sorts of hamburger insane. Vince took one look at the man who'd become the face of his company, turned to Bruce and said, and I quote, "Get that walking, talking steroid billboard out of our backstage." I mean, sure, almost a decade earlier, the steroid trial had almost brought down the company. And sure, John Cena looked like he had invented steroids at the time, but just imagine if Vince hadn't been talked down. I think a lot of us criticize Vince for his perceived stubbornness and refusal to budge in the face of criticism, but if this list has taught us nothing else, it's that if Vince had actually been as stubborn as he's accused of, then wrestling history would look very different. Hey, you've just finished watching one of our lists. We super appreciate that. And now you're probably going to be served a lot of videos because you're viewing history. Sometimes it feels like the internet's following us around, knowing too much about us, like DDP following The Undertaker's wife. Careful there, the internet. You're about to get buried at King of the Ring. Whether you're using US Netflix in the UK to watch classic Twilight Zone episodes, or in the US you want to watch His Dark Materials on iPlayer, Surfshark VPN secures your data with uncrackable encryption, secure VPN protocols, and maintains a strict no-logs policy that prevents companies from logging their users' data. It's not just about privacy, it's about safety too, as Surfshark automatically blocks more than 1 million known malicious websites, phishing methods, and other threats. Get out of here, DDP. Browse securely and safely with Surfshark. Try it today at surfshark.deals/jamthatjam. Enter promo code jamthatjam for 83% off and 3 months for free. Link at the top of the description for more details. And that's our list. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it around the internet. Why not? Make sure you subscribe to PartsFUNknown for more silly wrestling content, and jam that jam.